Hi, everyone. We'll be starting in just another minute here. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for this webinar. My name is Jyotsna Pandey, and I serve as the Community Programs Director for the American Institute of Biological Sciences, as well as Executive Director for the Natural Science Collections Alliance. I'm a member of the BCoN Steering Committee. BCoN is the Biodiversity Collections Network. We are glad that you can join us for this webinar hosted by BCoN and AIBS, where we will be sharing an update from our latest effort, the BioFAIR Data Network Project, funded by the National Science Foundation. We held a series of listening sessions over the summer and want to share our findings from, with the broader scientific and collections community. We also hope to get additional input today as we plan for our final workshop that's scheduled for February. Before we start, some housekeeping. We want to spend some time today providing you with some background information about BCoN and what we hope to accomplish. And from there, we will be sort of getting into our latest effort, the BioFAIR Data Network Project, what has happened so far, what we've learned, and what are our next steps. But I just wanted to quickly share that we will be recording this session today and posting it on the BCoN website and sharing it via email. Today, you'll be able to use the chat feature to share your comments and to introduce yourself. Please use the Zoom Q&A feature to ask your questions, which we'll have a Q&A session at the end of our presentations. And if you would like to speak during the webinar, you should be able to. If you just use the raise hand question, we'll know that you have verbal comments and we'll go ahead and unmute you. And if you're having any kind of technical difficulties, go ahead and contact AIBS IT support via chat, and we should be able to get that sorted. So to start us off, BCoN Steering Committee member Matthew Sheik is going to be providing us with an introduction to BCoN and BioFAIR. Take it away, Matthew.
Thanks, Jyotsna. So, hi, my name is Matthew Sheik, and I'm the collections assistant for the natural history collections at Denver Botanic Gardens in Denver, Colorado. And I'm one of the 6 early career professionals brought on to be a part of the BCoN steering committee for the BioFAIR project. So BCoN is a group that is dedicated to helping move forward initiatives that facilitate and expand the utility of biological collections. It started from a 5-year RCN grant from the NSF in 2014, and although the first grant ended in 2020, the work of this group continues. So BCoN was founded by the American Institute of Biological Sciences, the Society for the Preservation of Natural History Collections, and the Natural Science Collections Alliance, but has 38 other supporting organizations. And BCoN's primary objective is to support the collections community by promoting new uses for collections and their derivative data, and to further our community's relationship to others that are also committed to documenting and preserving life on Earth. Next slide, please. The BCoN Steering Committee is made up of representatives from both living collections, including zoo cultures, as well as preserved collections, including natural history museums, cryopreserved, and paleontological specimens. The BioFAIR project specifically brought on 6 emerging and early career professionals to the BCoN Steering Committee, and we all bring unique perspectives as the community engages with the broader scientific community. Next slide, please. One of the prominent initiatives supported by BCoN is the Extended Specimen Network, or ESN. From discussions held between 2017 and 2018, the BCoN committee and biodiversity and collections research communities BCoN wrote and published the extended specimen report. The publication argues that transforming our wealth of physical specimens and related digital data into an extended specimen network should be the next community priority. Next slide, please. And just so that we all have familiarity with the concept, I'll give a quick overview of the ESN. So the idea is that the ESN would build upon the success of specimen digitization by creating a robust linked web of data, integrating the primary data from biodiversity specimens with their associated derivative and complementary data. Some examples of these derivative data include genetic data derived from a specimen or pictures of the specimen in the field before it was collected. But it also includes climate data and environmental data extracted from the lat longs provided on specimen labels. These derivative and complementary data serve as extensions, as visualized in the diagram on the slide, and this network of specimen-linked data would facilitate and inform an ever-growing range of complex research questions and fundamental research endeavors, such as species extinction, climate change, spread of disease, tracking invasive species, and more. Next slide, please. So there have been monumental efforts to integrate data across all levels, from specimen creation, such as linking in situ field photos with their respective specimen vouchers, to products of research, such as publications and genetic sequences. And this kind of integration was facilitated by expanded use of unique identifiers for objects with catalog numbers, data sets with unique DOIs, and people with identifiers such as the ORCID numbers that are used throughout the data lifecycle. And it was quickly realized, though, that the full vision of the ESN would rely on the involvement of the global community and engagement with biological data communities whose domains are in the second and third extension orbits to create the needed data linkages. But that's a big task. We've already begun efforts to tackle this, though, with international collaboration on a combined digital extended specimen initiative with the Distributed System of Scientific Collections, or DISCO, which is the European effort for natural history collection data mobilization, and others to align efforts and build the necessary infrastructure and capacity to support this endeavor. So our current project, the BIOFAIR Data Network, aims to initially engage an expansive set of current and prospective partners outside the collections community to understand how can the ESN vision integrate data and expand the utility of these collections and their associated data with the ecological, environmental, genetic, One Health, and biodiversity informatics communities. Next slide, please. So why should the collections community care about these conversations about integrating data? Firstly, we believe that specimens rely on it. Developing cyber infrastructure to support deep integration across all levels of specimen data, multiple communities, and the products of collections-based research facilitated through the use of unique identifiers assigned to published FAIR data objects will allow us to answer important complex research questions. All of the digitization work for the past couple of decades was the necessary underlying groundwork to fully realizing an extended specimen network. This work fully realizes the discussions we've had about what a 21st century herbarium entails. A fully realized extended specimen network will make more accurate and cleaner data available to a broader range of scientific communities, increasing the relevance of natural history collections and contributing to novel research. And lastly, we believe this effort would expand and diversify our scientific workforce with transferable skills, which also will help bolster community support for collections and collections data as we engage in these discussions with other data domains. Next slide, please. Okay, the goal of this webinar is for the members of BIOFAIR project to relay what we've learned from the discussions had during the last 6 listening sessions we conducted over the last few months. We've reached outside the collections community to identify shared goals and challenges with data communities across the federal, ecological, environmental, genetic data, biodiversity informatics, and One Health Sciences to explore the feasibility of uniting these into a comprehensive network of biological data. And so with that, I'll hand it off to David Kunkel to talk about the takeaways from these listening sessions.
Thank you, Matthew. So my name is David Kunkel, and I'm a PhD candidate in the Department of Plant Biology at Oklahoma State University, as well as an emerging professional member of the BCoN Steering Committee. And so I'll be taking us through some summary slides from each of the listening sessions and sharing some unique challenges and priorities that were identified in each of those sessions. Each session was about 2 hours long and focused on exploring the current and ongoing community needs and future goals of the contributors, managers, and end users of biodiversity data with the objective of identifying information gaps and common goals. Listening sessions were conducted for the 6 identified data domains listed to the left-hand side of the slide. So discussion topics within each domain included what's the current status of your data resource or resources? What are your plans for future development? What are your greatest challenges in growing and managing your data resources? How could integration with other data sources advance your goals? Are there existing conceptual frameworks for integrating data in this domain? How would you approach aligning with other frameworks, including the extended specimen network? And what do you view as the best path toward integrating your data with other sources? Next slide, please. Before I discuss the individual sessions, I wanted to give you a rundown of how these slides will be set up. Each session will first have a slide that gives you the session focus, the organizers of the session, some of the key points that the session leads wanted to highlight about their session, then a collection of the organizations that were represented in the participants of the session shown at the bottom with their logos. The second slide will highlight the challenges and future needs of each of the data communities with a QR code that will take you to the summary report for the listening session if you wanted to read a more in-depth summary regarding any of these data domains. So the first session focused on federal agencies and sought to learn about challenges associated with the data of these agencies and how they are stored or shared with, across agencies or with the more public, broader community. This is because, as the group points out, these collections are different since these are often tied to a particular mission within an agency. They are supported by Congress, which can often mean funding for extended periods, and they often have to follow a higher standard of legal and regulatory enforcement. Next slide, please. So some of the major themes that were in this session included challenges associated with cybersecurity requirements being different within agencies and under constant change due to changes in either policy or administration, giving permissions for broad data access for federal data in particular, since they may be linked to certain restricted or proprietary information. And the federal data may also become stale in repositories from not being regularly updated, leading to inaccurate and outdated data. With these challenges, the session participants identified several needs. The two highlighted here are the need for harmonized data standards and cybersecurity policies to enable data sharing and integration across agencies, and a need to address legacy data representation and permissions needed for data access and integration. Next slide, please. The second session focused on genetics and genomics data, and this group highlighted several considerations for these collections here on the slide. The integration of sequence information with specimen records, and benefit sharing from the use of digital sequence information on genetic resources. Next slide. Some challenges posed during this session included a lack of metadata and persistent identifiers associated with sequence records or sequence information, a lack of consistency and accuracy across those vouchers, and an inability to embargo data for regulation compliance. Needs included the development of integration tools to cut across platforms and data types, as well as the development of data curation tools that allow institutions and communities to make annotations to existing data. Next slide. The third session focused on the One Health field, where key stakeholders for this session included zoos, museums, agencies, and disease-focused nonprofit organizations. Some considerations were that sample collection should emphasize local infrastructure for long-term sustainability, and that specimen data need to be accessible outside of just the museum community. Next slide, please. Challenges posed by this group included the handling of different biosafety level specimens, limited funding for broader surveys as opposed to specific pathogen surveys, and a lack of communication between the museum and veterinary communities. Needs from this session included a central organization that can host all biosafety level specimens, development of a forecasting and real-time assessment service for pathogens, and improved communication around the import and export of samples. Next slide, please. The fourth session focused on ecological data, with primary considerations focusing on data integration among ecological data sets and between ecological data and other kinds of data. Cross-scale and platform integration can also be challenging, and the potential for increased investment in standards and tools to promote integration among services. Next slide, please. Challenges that were brought up in this session included recognizing the need for better integration with emerging data types and to promote the integration of participatory science-derived data into this network as well. Needs included an increased flexibility in data models to incorporate a broad range of data types, such as those emerging data types listed on the left-hand side, dedicated managers for species data, and translators across different repositories responsible for connecting types of ecological data across heterogeneous sources. Next slide, please. Our fifth session focused on climate and environmental data. And during this session, several questions were considered. Is species occurrence data derived from biological specimens included within the definition and scope of environmental data? What changes are needed to improve the interoperability of species occurrence data derived from specimens with other types of environmental data? And what outcomes can we envision from greater integration of specimen-derived and other types of environmental data? Next slide, please. Challenges that were brought forward in this session included a difficulty for finding relevant data sets, considering the large volume of data sets that are available, missing or incomplete metadata associated with those data sets, and a lack of standard for documenting the loss or absence of species. Needs included a catalog of international environmental data resources that could be continuously updated so that researchers could find the most relevant data sets to their questions, a global gap analysis for environmental data, and increased data sharing across environmental data types. Next slide, please. The final listening session focused on biodiversity informatics. The key considerations in this session were what existing tools and infrastructure are already being developed, what is missing from those developing frameworks, how can we synergize efforts and identify gaps, the major challenges for realizing data integration, and how do we accommodate data sovereignty and traditional knowledge throughout this process. Next slide, please. Challenges posed in this session included a lack of consistent unique identifiers and attribution mechanisms, as well as balancing protections for data sovereignty and traditional knowledge with fair data principles. Needs included the need to explore potential collaborations and integrations across current data infrastructure projects, legal and ethical considerations, as well as balancing fair data principles with those considerations. And so with that, I will now pass it off to Andrew Bentley, who will discuss the cross-cutting summary report.
Thank you, David. Hi, everybody. My name is Andy Bentley. I'm with the Biodiversity Institute at the University of Kansas. I'm also a steering committee member of BCoN and the BioFAIR project. So I'd like to highlight some general takeaways from the listening sessions and discuss the cross-cutting report generated to inform the rest of our process going forward. We had about 199 people representing 139 projects and institutions participate in the 6 listening sessions, and these participants indicated strong support for the underlying premise of a globally accessible data network. There was an understanding that data integration requires both technical infrastructure solutions as well as the development of social norms and contracts, and these have yet to be realized. Significant barriers still exist, including data access, discovery, and standardization, insufficient training, and insecure data resources. Overcoming these barriers will require a collective impact model for fair data. Next slide, please. So collective impact is about a collaborative approach to forming a network of community members, organizations, and institutions who advance by learning together, aligning and integrating their actions to achieve systems-level change. Collective impact brings people together in a structured way to achieve this goal. We need to build a new, more inclusive and comprehensive community of biological and environmental data providers and users in order to break down the barriers and overcome these challenges. Next slide, please. Summary documents from the individual listening sessions were used to generate a comprehensive list of outcomes, challenges, and recommendations. This process identified a number of cross-cutting themes as well as some unique challenges for individual groups. These were combined into a summary report, which will be used to inform the final workshop discussion with the aim of discussing possible solutions to our goal of a fully integrated BIOFAIR data network. The summary report can be found at the link or by scanning the QR code. It's also being posted in the chat. Next slide, please. So let's look at some of these cross-cutting themes in more detail. We need to address equity in data access. Bandwidth and access issues in developing countries prevent data access and sharing. This means that we are not only missing data from climatically sensitive biodiverse regions of the world, but also excluding the participation of scientists in these regions from documenting the impact of global environmental change. It is essential for data to be fair and accessible to all. Next slide, please. We need to establish standards and protocols for ethical use of data. Data access strategies must balance fair data principles with necessary data protections. We must ensure that legal and ethical considerations such as data sovereignty, attribution, and permissions surrounding traditional knowledge are incorporated into models for data sharing and integration. We need to engage with indigenous communities and incorporate local context labels and notices where possible. Data redaction and embargoing should be explored to protect sensitive information and comply with existing and emerging regulations. Next slide, please. We need to incentivize best practices. Documentation of datasets should include complete and standardized metadata with details on data cleaning methods, analysis, and synthesized data storage, while clean or augmented data should be shared back to the data providers. We should better describe data types and tools to facilitate integration across domain-specific data types. A system of credit or recognition for submitting data and metadata that adhere to best practices might also incentivize more attention by researchers to this aspect of their work. CMS providers should develop mechanisms for data curation and annotation while providing clear guidance on how to cite material from their collection in genetic repositories, including unique identifiers and linking protocols, while data users should cite data sources to provide clear attribution. Journals, publishers, and their editorial board members should establish common standards for citing specimen and sequence data in publications, including supplementary materials with specimen and sequence IDs. Funding agencies should require that data and specimen management plans submitted with research proposals include plans for data sharing, citation, and deposition in appropriate repositories, and should provide guidance to grant applicants on how to develop and budget for such activities. Next slide, please. We need to increase data availability. We're still missing the data needed for a comprehensive network of biological and environmental data. Gaps include datasets that underlie research projects, especially small and focused datasets from individual researchers and monitoring programs. Non-standard data types such as acoustic data and data gathered in participatory or community science projects. In some cases, data may exist but are not shared due to concerns about cybersecurity, embargoes for publication priority, and/or oversampling of sensitive species. In addition, many providers restrict the use of their data by the private sector, even though the private sector is a major provider and user of environmental data. Similarly, there are restrictions within the private sector to wide sharing of their data and analyses. Institutions, projects, and individuals holding data resources should continue to prioritize the digitization of these resources, as well as continue to improve these resources through augmentation and standardization. Community leaders, perhaps in the form of a sustainably funded data action center, could address data access barriers as described above and ensure that a biological and environmental data network is compatible with existing infrastructure projects. Next slide, please. We need to improve data integration. Currently, we do not have common language ontologies or data models that are flexible enough to support a BIOFAIR data network. We need to create resources to better describe data types and facilitate integration across domain-specific data types. Data integration would be facilitated by enhancements to the data core model, such as the Humboldt core extension for ecological inventories, designed to improve the integration of ecological monitoring data, for example, acoustic monitoring, camera trap, and animal movement data, and other extensions to include a single system of persistent resolvable identifiers required for a digital extended specimen architecture. Collaboration with existing and emerging initiatives like the Biodiversity Digital Twin project would be beneficial. Differences in methodologies and scale of data represent barriers to integration, and we need clarification regarding applicable standards and limitations of historical versus newly gathered data. Researchers, data providers, publishers, and funding agencies should explore the use of persistent identifiers, such as digital object identifiers or DOIs, for linking specimen data across different databases and repositories, considering the challenges of low and middle income countries by devising brokering services to provide the necessary linking infrastructure. Next slide, please. We need to provide adequate training. There is a need for more robust education or training resources to ensure the effective use and maintenance of biological and environmental datasets. The quantity and breadth of interdisciplinary research are limited not only by data availability, but also by a lack of skills for appropriate and innovative data use by potential users. Participants called for the development of human resources that focus on data sharing and integration. Research communities should prioritize hiring data managers, and they should provide training opportunities in data management skills. We should also provide and disseminate the necessary attribution metrics for data collection and curation to highlight human participation in the data lifecycle. And lastly, next slide, please. And lastly, we need to maintain existing data sources. Many key data resources lack a plan for sustainable funding. Data resources that underlie research analyses and conclusions must remain available so they can be used to reproduce this research. Therefore, a biological and environmental data community must explore sustainable funding and infrastructure models for long-term data preservation and access through increased engagement with public and private funding sources. We should also take steps to unify the landscape of multiple aggregators such as GBIF, GGBN, IDIGBio, OBIS, VertNet, and others to provide a simpler, more user-friendly, standardized experience while also exploring more efficient publishing mechanisms to link specimens to citations and other data sources. And with that, I'll hand it back to Jyotsna, who will talk about our planning for the final workshop.
Thanks, Andy. So with the listening sessions now wrapped up and summarized, we've entered the second phase of the BIOFAIR project, in which we will be organizing a virtual interdisciplinary workshop now scheduled for February 13th. We hope to engage a subset of the participants from each of the 6 listening sessions, as well as additional individuals and experts to really delve deeper into discussions about a collaborative path forward. We're also aiming to engage more international participation in the workshop. The goal of this workshop is to bring together a more expansive and non-conventional set of data communities to work together to identify next steps, develop recommendations, and create a roadmap that outlines the gaps, needs, and actions that are needed to build a fair, open, and integrated biological and environmental data network. Now, discussions will address how the various representative communities can work together to augment our initiatives with the ultimate vision of integrating data. What we hope emerges from the BioFair Data Network project is a commitment among the communities we have identified to work, collaboratively towards the creation of a data network and a plan for how such a network might be created and managed. Hopefully, a group will emerge that is willing to work towards the implementation of such a network. Specific products that we hope will emerge are, a statement of engagement, which articulates a set of agreed upon principles, and a collaborative agreement, a roadmap, as well as a couple of publications. So that wraps up the presentation part of this webinar. We will now take questions from the audience, as well as comments and additional input. Moderating this portion of the program are our fellow steering committee members, John Bates, Greg Watkins-Colwell, and Cameron Pittman.
Hi, everybody. I'm John Bates, and we hope you've enjoyed the presentation. And again, we want to hear from you. So if you got questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A, which should be activated by now. All right, we've got one here. Along with biodiversity-centered organizations like GBIF, will BioFair coordinate with the data curation and data sharing advocacy organizations such as Research Data Alliance, Data Curation Network, and others that are curation focused? Andy, you want to take that one?
Sorry, I was responding to a question offline. Yes, for sure. There are obviously a lot of people who are involved in this space, RDA being one of them, and various others. Obviously, DISCO is pushing a huge initiative in Europe. And so the hope is that we can engage a lot of these, people in this discussion. As I said, one of the others that has emerged fairly recently is this whole idea of digital twins. And there is a group that is involved with biodiversity digital twins, or BioDT as they call themselves. And we'll definitely be looking at engaging those groups of people as well in these discussions, because there's a lot of infrastructure that's already been created. We don't want to reinvent the wheel. If we can sort of bring those people into the discussion and try and make sure that all of the existing resources fit together and are able to do what we need them to be able to do, then that's obviously the best path forward.
Joseph, do you want to answer the question about the February workshop and where it'll be held?
Sure. There's a question in the Q&A about whether the February workshop will be hybrid. This will be an online workshop, so not a hybrid workshop, and it will take place via Zoom. I was going to type the answer, but I accidentally hit answer live.
And there's another question about participation and how it's going to be.
It will be invitation only, because our goal is to try to have a really broad representation from different data communities, different expertise, different career stages, but we are accepting interest. Like, if you would really like to participate in this workshop, we will share a link really soon, and you can sign up, express your interest. We will certainly consider it, but we are trying to keep numbers at a manageable level, at the same time ensuring that we have diverse voices and perspectives represented.
So there's a question in the chat about NASA data, particularly in reference to surface biology and geology satellite, asking about who would be the person to talk to in the BioFair community with conventions and best practices. Anybody want to take a stab at answering that? I mean, from my perspective, I think what this is where we are. We're super excited to hear about these data and think about how best to do this. And I think this is where opportunities like this need to go into the upcoming discussion and be part of the roadmap development. Anybody else want to chime in there? We've got another question on connections. Oh, interesting question about having more opportunities to see who else is here, and so that people can create better connections. Josina, do you want to handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that's something we can do with webinar platforms, but I think it's a question for Diane. Can we let people see who's on the call in a webinar platform?
No, we cannot.
We'll be happy to share, sort of list of different organizations that are sort of represented on this call. And if you're interested in, who so far has been a part of this conversation, check out our summary reports from the 6 sessions. We have a summary of, the different projects, institutions, efforts that are kind of represented as part of each of these listening sessions. So you'll see that there's a pretty broad range of groups that have been part of our conversation so far. And we'd be happy to share like a brief summary of, the kinds of groups that are on the call today.
And Jack and Michaela have pointed out that it needs to be a regular Zoom meeting rather than a webinar, which is something that we discussed and went with the webinar format for this particular meeting. How does this initiative interface with IPDES?
So for those who don't know, IPDES is the International Partners for the Digital Extended Specimen. A number of the folks here who are part of the BCoN steering committee are members of IPDES. It's a group that meets fairly regularly, sort of once a month or once every 2 months, just to talk about new initiatives or progress on existing initiatives that are working towards this whole idea of the digital extended specimen. So there's people from DISCO, there's people from GBIF, there's people from iSamples, there's a number of people from some of these existing initiatives that are out there trying to solve various pieces of this puzzle. And it's an idea to try and get these people together to discuss interoperability of existing infrastructure or new things that have recently come about that may impact the way this is all being put together. And so, I think what we're proposing here in terms of the BIOFAIR network dovetails really nicely with the work of IPDES and the work of DISCO and the work of GBIF and all of these other communities that are looking at data integration and the extended specimen as sort of the next major push in terms of digital data. So yeah, I think there's a lot of commonalities there and a lot of transfer of knowledge between the two groups.
Donat Agosti has pointed out that publishers and editors are missing. I think it's an interesting point, and I think it's something we should definitely fix in terms of how we're doing things. And so we're definitely open to perspectives on that. Anybody else want to comment on that? Or Donat, do you want to come on and talk a little more about that?
So just an initial thought on that. There were a number of publishers who were invited to the Biodiversity Informatics listening session. We did have a couple of people from the publishing community who were part of those discussions and were actively involved in those discussions. And a couple of those people have been put forward as possible attendees for the final workshop to specifically talk to the realm of publishing and how they can facilitate the linkages between these various data sources. We do totally realize that publishers are one of the major linkages between publishing the results of research and linking it to all of these, derivative resources that are created from research on specimens. And so, we would love to hear your perspectives, and we would love to, include publishers and editors into the discussions that are happening at the final workshop.
Yeah, I'd say, Donat, if you have specific people in mind who might be really good, who might be able to share really important perspectives as part of this workshop, please do share the link we will be sharing in a bit with those people so that they might sign up. We'd be very happy to include more publishers in the conversation.
Dave Bloom has a great point about smaller institutions and smaller collections and data holders. How do we get them more integrated in this over time? Anybody want to chime in on that?
It's a difficult one. It's a bit of catch-22. We all understand that digitization is a time-consuming and cost-consuming process. It involves people, time, and money. And so, trying to digitize a collection that doesn't have very many of those resources, or any of those three resources, can be tricky. It can be extremely difficult. To me, one of the things that I envisage the Action Center being able to do, in North America at least, is be able to facilitate some of these mechanisms that would allow digitization of these things to happen. So one of the things that I've always thought about is sort of a roving gang of students that you can have, provide them with all of the infrastructure that they need to digitize a collection, and literally have them roving around the country digitizing these little resources that are out there. Or helping them to digitize their collections so that that data is made available, and having as a prerequisite of that this data is then published to the network so that it's available. I think it's something that NSF would probably go for if we could find the money to fund something like that. It would be a win-win. You would be training the next generation of people to come through and be able to look after collections and digitize them and organize them, etc. Plus, it would provide us with that extra data that we would be able to, put into the data network itself. But it's tricky, time, people, and money. We need more of all three of them in order to get it done.
Or maybe we just need Dave Bloom's email address more publicly distributed to bring on a bunch more institutions. Dave, thanks for that question. So we've got a question from Jutta Buschbaum. Still one, or identification of a gap. One gap could be considered is more engagement in the science policy interface. So much is happening in that domain currently, also due to the ongoing crises. Yeah, I hope that continues to be something that we can discuss going on. What does the panel say?
Correct me if I'm wrong, John, but weren't there a couple of science policy people who were invited to the One Health session?
Yeah, we did have a few, and but this is one thing I would say to everybody on this call is science policy is something we've got to be fighting for in the coming years, for sure.
Yeah, one thing I'll say is the BCoN project is federally funded right now, like the BIOFAIR project is. So that limits our ability to kind of delve into advocacy or lobbying, of course. But at the same time, we have partners like AIBS and NSCA that are advocating and will continue to advocate for, collections priorities, scientific priorities. So that will be ongoing. But specifically for the BIOFAIR project, there are some, we have to be, our goals are to enable and coordinate future ongoing initiatives and make those connections towards data integration. So I definitely get your point, Jutta, and that's something that we've, advocacy and policy are certainly important aspects in all of this. But at the same time, we will be relying on our partners to do some of that work. An
anonymous attendee has made the point that making biodiversity resources and data fair and equitable globally is easier said than done. How can we tackle this equitable open access? And it's a legitimate question. It's something that we talk about all the time at the level of BCoN and the international interactions we have through BCoN. Anybody want to comment on that? I mean, I guess I'd say that as Yuta knows, it's an ongoing discussion, and I think that it's something that has to be on our minds, and we have to be looking for opportunities to get the broader international community engaged in these efforts. And at the same time, I think the better off we are at taking care of our own databases, the better we're going to be able to work with everybody else to try to do a better job internationally too. But it's definitely a long-term goal, and part of the challenges are that's a international policy challenge too. And so we have to think about ways to do that at the international scale. We have a question about who's building, maintaining, and updating those repositories. Again, I think that one of the primary things is figuring out the best ways to find the long-term funding that needs to exist for this. And that's going to be a continuing challenge.
And together with that, finding new sources of funding. I think we can't continue to rely on NSF. We have to find other sources of funding that can help us out with these kinds of things, or whatever the corollary is in international countries. And again, it's one of the things that I think the Action Center could take on is, finding these available resources in terms of, people and money to be able to fund these things. It's fairly obvious that we need a tremendous injection of cash into the biodiversity sphere in order to do all the things that we want to be able to do. And it's just not happening. And so we need to find ways to, make our collections more relevant, make our collections more available to a larger group of people so that we can prove that our collections are relevant for, tackling the big questions of our day, and thereby try and encourage more funding for biodiversity and more funding for collections so that we can get a lot more of this stuff done. We need to hire more people. We need to, get more infrastructure. It's the only way that we're going to be able to do it.
So Tyler, apologies, Boret and Dave Bloom have made some comments about your team of roving digitizers, Andy. I'd agree that it's certainly true that these small institutions are always going to have some challenges that are different than the big institutions. And what I'd say is my mantra is always, this is where the network of networks comes in. If we could develop more hubs, I think, at a national level that can go out into the communities locally and work with these collections, I think that might be a model that could make a big difference. Anybody else?
Yeah, I certainly haven't thought through this idea with any great clarity. So there are obviously lots of variables here that haven't been considered.
So David Shorthouse comments that flexibility in candidate data models wasn't something that was raised early on in the chat, and he talks about some of the course concepts that DISCO folks are having challenges with. Does BCoN have a plan for developing a core data model and exchange protocol for DES like that, and OpenDS, and a contingency plan if versions elsewhere are misaligned?
think the short answer is we don't. I think a lot of that work is being driven by DISCO. They are a lot further along than we are in terms of thinking about these kinds of things. But obviously, there needs to be engagement by the broader community in the work that DISCO is doing in terms of their digital extended specimen model to ensure that all of these scenarios are taken care of. I think to me, it doesn't make much sense for us to reinvent the wheel. DISCO is far enough along with this process that I think we all need to be involved in that process to ensure that whatever they come up with works on a global scale and works for everybody and all kinds of data.
Well, and I think in my optimistic viewpoint, there are more connections and conversations going on than there ever have been before. And hopefully that'll make the difference in some of this. But there's no doubt that someone, the experts in this field who have done this for a long time know how hard that is to actually achieve.
Yeah, and I think, all of the discussions that we're having through IPDES and through BioFAIR and various other mechanisms will hopefully ensure that there are no misaligned visions, that everybody's vision is the same and everybody's on the same page, which is, I think, what we're working towards.
So Jack asks, does the private sector support fit in here, philanthropic, and specifically with respect to smaller or underrepresented communities, institutions, or projects? Well, I think the answer to that is we'd certainly like to think it could be. And again, the mechanisms for kind of reaching out to that, I think, have got to be developed through a network of some kind. And that's what I see we're trying to put together here in a better fashion, basically at all scales. So national, regional, and international.
You got some email addresses, Jack?
So Kid asks, have there been thoughts specifically in BioFAIR and BCoN about leveraging HCI and social technical system experts to think about these networks of networks and information ecosystems? I think that's a fascinating question, Kit, because I always bring up the fact that the National Academy of Sciences put together a digital data report, and it was focused on digital data in the medical community and largely through NIH. And one of the things that I was very impressed with was how basically nobody from the health community was represented that I could tell on the author list. It was all computer science folks. And so I do think we need to more effectively talk to some of these people that think in worlds that we are basically trying to utilize expertise that they already have. So Donat writes, one point which is not obvious so far is the connection to monitoring, especially the use of barcoding to meta-barcoding to EDAN. How is these new data integrated into the collection strategies? Isn't the influx of new observation data beyond the collections and should be coordinated?
Yeah. And Tyler kind of answered that question a little, but we have had those discussions, and that's certainly part of the conversation.
Yeah, eDNA is definitely a new and emerging field that I think a lot of people still have yet to grapple with. It's producing huge amounts of data and sort of a new paradigm of data in terms of the way it sort of interfaces with our concept of a traditional specimen. And so I think it's going to take some serious discussions to figure that out. But you're right, there is an understanding that observation data is a huge component of this. There is so much observation data coming through. You look at GBIF and sort of 3/4 of it is observation data. So there is an understanding that observation data is important in this whole network and in the digital extended specimen. And hopefully we can coordinate, the integration of traditional voucher-based material that we have in our collections and observation material that's coming from numerous different sources. Yeah, and James says presence absence data. So there is also now a push to, looking at absence data. You went somewhere and you didn't see this.
Well, and I would just point out that I think there's a real value for smaller institutions associated with these kinds of data points in their collections. And I think it has the potential to increase options for small collections to participate in the broader efforts across geography. So I think that can be, it's a very pie in the sky situation, but tools like eBird have obviously illustrated what can happen over very short periods of time if you have a nice data setup. So Tyler writes, when regulated plant pathogens have been detected by eDNA methods, usually the authors go out of their way to undermine their own result. It's a powerful tool that is greatly underutilized.
Totally agree.
Any more questions? All right. Jyotsna, do you have any last words to close things up?
Yes, I do. Just one final slide to share some information. But first, I just want to thank all the speakers and moderators, and thanks to the audience for joining and sharing your comments and questions and ideas. We've really enjoyed all the discussions we've had so far as part of this project and all the perspectives that have been shared from various data domains. We really look forward to more conversations towards data integration next year. So we really hope that you will get involved either by sharing your comments on our website, that's the first link, or by expressing your interest to attend the workshops, as I mentioned earlier. So you can use the QR codes on your screens or the links that will be posted in the chat shortly to engage with us in this project. And this is, of course, an ongoing conversation. So this is just, a start of these discussions. We certainly hope to carry forward these discussions after this project wraps up by the middle of next year. But yeah, thank you again for joining and have a great rest of your day.